Washington Post Greg Miller, who broke the story Friday, and Malcolm Nance, an MSNBC terrorism analyst and a former intelligence officer himself. He's the author of The Plot to Hack America. I've got a little time here for all this, but we got to get to it. Senator Coons, what do you make of Trump's claim that the CIA is not to be trusted? He's just going to go on his own wits in terms of everything. No more briefings, nothing.
It's very disturbing, Chris. Someone who, as president-elect, has a strikingly limited amount of experience in intelligence matters or in international affairs is saying we just should disregard that Russia is not our friend and that all of the intelligence community, not just the CIA, more than a dozen different intelligence agencies across the entire U.S. government has delivered a message to Congress that with high confidence they believe at the most senior levels of the Russian government there was an intentional effort to interfere with our democracy. I'm very pleased that Republican Senate Leader Mitch McConnell has joined with Senators McCain and Graham and Rubio and others in a bipartisan call to make sure we get to the bottom of this and that we respond appropriately. I think this is a very big deal, Chris.
What do you think, as an American, of the fact that the evidence now that the Russia, the former Soviet Union over there, if you will, from my memory, we can all remember the Cold War, that country over there deliberately got involved in our political campaigning so that one side, the one they wanted to win, in this case, Trump, won? What do you make of that as an American, not as a politician?
Well, Chris, first, I led a bipartisan delegation to Eastern Europe back in August when we first got news that this was likely happening. And it's striking to me how many countries across Central, Eastern, and Western Europe have already been victims of overt and covert Russian interference in their elections. This is something that the Russians are doing across all of Europe. And as an American, I think this goes right to the heart of our country. We are defined as a democracy. And if we allow this to go unchallenged, if we allow this to go uninvestigated, and if we allow this to go without a robust response, I think we're letting down America.
Why are they picking Trump? Why do they want him?
Well, I think that's something we should be investigating more thoroughly. But his nominee, his potential nominee for Secretary of State, just to give one example, Rex Tillerson, is somebody who is such a close friend of Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin that he's received a Medal of Friendship from Vladimir Putin. I'm concerned that anyone who is a close friend of Vladimir Putin may not really have the best interests of the United States at heart.
Let me go to Greg. Congratulations, Greg, on this incredible reporting. I mean, credible reporting, I should say. What do you know that drove them? Do we know what drove the Russians to intervene in our election on behalf of Trump?
Well, I mean, I think that the sense we have is that they were sort of trying lots of different things and then exploring lots of vulnerabilities from various parties and various candidates. It was sort of equal opportunity hacking in multiple directions. But as it became clearer and clearer that Trump would be the Republican nominee and then, in fact, have a real shot at winning, a lot more energy went into supporting that prospect and that possibility. And I would add to what the senator was just saying, I think that, you know, it initially looked like they were just out to undermine confidence in democratic institutions or just a simple presidential vote in the United States. And then over time, it became more of a concerted effort to try to get Trump into office.
When did they decide not to release the hacked information from the Republican National Committee as they had done with the Democratic National Committee?
We've spent a fair amount of time reporting on that exact question, Chris, and we have a story, I think it will run tomorrow, that will hopefully clear that up a bit. It's a little murky, but it's one of the big questions is whether they actually obtained a trove of Republican material. They certainly tried. They certainly made attempts to get material. And if they didn't, there's a question about why they didn't try. I mean, there are a lot of security officials I talked to said the Russians are certainly capable of getting into an unclassified network like the RNC computer systems. They don't appear necessarily to have gathered a comparable trove in this case. So it's not obvious that they had one and were sitting on it. It looks more likely that they went after the Democrats harder, got more material, and put all of it or a lot of it out.
How sophisticated are the Russians in figuring out and basically plucking the stuff they knew would cause trouble?
Well, I think that the Russians are regarded as highly sophisticated, one of the most sophisticated cyber adversaries for the United States. And I think, though, that you see here, they have a pretty decent understanding of the vulnerabilities of the American system and in some ways how little is required to sow confusion, if not dissent. Yeah. So, I mean, just the storylines that we've seen, even over the past several days, if these are true conclusions from the CIA, if they're accurate, I mean, this must be deeply satisfying to Putin and the Kremlin.
I know, because they pulled this stuff about Donna Brazile and the stuff from Palmieri about her fellow Catholics. I thought they really knew their stuff, unfortunately. In his interview for Fox this weekend, Donald Trump also dismissed the idea of even having a daily intelligence briefing as president. Let's watch.
I just want to ask you about your skepticism about the intelligence community. You are getting the presidential daily brief only once a week.
Well, I get it when I need it.
But is there some skepticism?
I get it first of all, these are very good people that are giving me the briefings. And I say, if something should change from this point, immediately call me. I'm available on 1 minute's notice. I don't have to be told, I'm like a smart person. I don't have to be told the same thing and the same words every single day for the next 8 years. Could be 8 years, but 8 years. I don't need that. But I do say, if something should change, let us know.
Malcolm Nance, free opportunity for you to critique what you just heard. I don't know what to make of it, because thank God we had the CIA telling us in August of 2001 that they were coming to attack us in this country, Al-Qaeda. Unfortunately, we had a president that didn't move on it, but the CIA damn well gave it to him in his PDB that day in August. So here's a president-elect who doesn't seem to want the PDB every day.
He doesn't seem to understand that the world changes on a very small scale every day. When he goes to sleep at night, if he hasn't read his PM dossier or his 2359 Zulu report at night, and the next morning, the world will wake up different. And he needs to know that. And although he says he can just come back to me when it changes, it's constantly changing. There are thousands of intelligence watch officers right now all around the world watching this program, smacking their foreheads, wondering whether the president-elect of the United States is absolutely oblivious to the intelligence processes, or he just doesn't care.
You know, the Medal of Freedom, Patrick Moynihan, the senator from New York, discovered it was a medal given to intelligence officers who were killed overseas. It had to be done quietly, but they had to be honored, and it was appropriate. We've lost a lot of spies over the years who have gone into horrible situations, been brilliant at risking their lives, and sometimes lost their lives for this country. What do you make of his broad brush attack on the intelligence community, Mr. Trump's? Malcolm.
Well, I think it's absolutely disgraceful. I mean, if the election hadn't occurred, it would be disqualifying, but we've been using that word a lot. I have 3 friends on the wall at the CIA. I have 6 who I've worked with at NSA's wall, on a wall of those who have lost their lives in the defense of this nation. There are tens of thousands of good people, men and women, working 24/7, 365 to defend this nation, and he discards them because he thinks he knows better. Right now, what we need to know is, why does this man's policy track with the Kremlin? Why does this man's policy seem dismissive of 70 years of American defense policy and strategies? Why does this man seem to have foreknowledge of intelligence operations which have occurred with the acquiescence or the direction of the Kremlin? This requires investigation, and believe me, I certainly hope that we get to the bottom of it.
Let me go back to Senator Coons. Senator Coons, an old Washington hand years ago, maybe 30, 40 years ago, told me that when you're dealing with bureaucrats, people who work for the country who are nonpartisan. They just do their job for the country. They don't make a ton of money. That's what they do. They serve the country. And he said they don't do their best work when they're being dumped on. He used worse words, but you get it. To dump on a bunch of people that work for the government and risk their lives in many cases and use the supreme ability of their intellect to try to save us from trouble. Where's this headed? What is Trump? If you could be his Dutch uncle, what would you tell him? What would you tell Trump right now?
I'd tell him to stop tweeting. I'd tell him to start taking your presidential daily briefing. And I'd tell him that frankly, it would be in his best interest and the country's interest for him to stop attacking the professionals in the intelligence community and start relying on their advice. I frankly think he's headed for some very rough water with both Republicans and Democrats in Congress. The idea that somehow he, as a great deal maker, might nominate someone for Secretary of State and for Deputy Secretary of State who also view themselves as great deal makers, and they might cut some grand deal with Putin that would sell down the river Ukraine or the Baltic allies we have through NATO, I think will profoundly upset the American people. And his disrespect to the career professionals in the intelligence community is a very alarming opening move before he's even been inaugurated.
Senator Coons of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, sir, and of the state of Delaware, thank you so much for coming on this very important night. Greg Miller, I think it's a very important bit of work you're doing right now, and I hope